Hey y'all, welcome back. It's MJ here, just plain fun, and I am now mic'd up. I'm happy to report. So welcome back. This is a video I've been wanting to do for a while. It's how to sell hand planes, or more specifically, how to list them, whether you're talking about eBay or on the CIHI or on Facebook Marketplace, wherever you happen to be listing your hand planes for sale. This is a good look at how to list them effectively. Let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is determine if your plane is complete. And if you're not sure, just ask somebody on one of the Facebook groups or somebody that you know. But you're going to want to know things like, is that screw missing? Is it missing, a chip breaker screw, anything. You're going to want to know, is your hand plane complete? Because your buyer is going to want to know that, and you're going to need to capture that in the pictures. After that, it's a matter of your hot spots. And I'm going to tell you what exactly those are. If you were selling a house, you're going to highlight the kitchen and the bathroom because that's what sells houses. If you're selling a hand plane, it's the tote, especially if it's rosewood, and the iron. That's what sells hand planes. So if it's a rosewood tote, a buyer is going to want it to be complete and intact and original to the plane if at all possible. That is going to make the biggest difference, at least in my experience. And then secondary to that, still a primary selling feature, if you will, is going to be the iron. Is it flat? Is it pitted? Is it the original iron? And also, how well does it mate up with the chip breaker? Also an important feature. But those are all things, and especially the back of the iron. This is what folks are going to want to see. This is what buyers are going to want to see. If they're planning on running that original iron, that vintage iron, they're going to want to know, what does the back of it look like? Is the iron flat? And is it pitted, especially on the business end there? And then how well does it mate up with the chip breaker? So when you connect these two, do you have a big gap there, or is it pretty tight? And of course, whether it's bent or warped or bowed is all going to be a contributing factor for whether that mates up well or not. Now you can see this one's actually got a gap right there. That wasn't even planned, but it's got a little gap there. Now granted, that can tighten up, but that tells me that something is bent there. So that's going to hurt the value on this particular plane. And don't get me wrong, these things can be adjusted, and of course, parts can be replaced, which is where a guy like me comes in. But chances are somebody's not going to want to spend more money than they're already spending on the plane. It's going to impact the amount of money that they're going to be willing to spend on your plane. While we're on the subject of totes or handles, let me just go ahead and talk about that for a second. A good, intact, original rosewood tote is going to set you back about $35 or $40. If it's not chipped up on the horn, if it hasn't been repaired, whether a stripe like this or just a crack repaired, if it's intact, original rosewood, it's going to set you back about $35 or $40. And the thing to remember there is this is the same tote that you're going to have on a Bedrock 608, which nowadays is going to cost you, $300 or more. It's the same tote that's on a Stanley number 5. So that's at least part of the reason. Then the relative scarcity is why it's going to cost you so much to get a rosewood tote. And the reason why I bring that up is because that is why it affects the price so greatly on one. So for example, this 4.5 right here, of course, it's all busted up here, this tote. And so that's really going to hurt the value if I was to try to sell this particular 4.5 as is. So far we've got totes and irons, also known as blades. And now it's going to be bodies. That's what's next. And especially the mouth. So even that little tiny chip right there on the back of that mouth is going to hurt the value on this. And then I know I mentioned this in other videos, but the little hairline cracks on the corners here from over tightened equipment up top, those little hairline cracks are really going to kill the value of your plane. And in case you haven't seen what that looks like yet, here's an example. Sometimes it'll be on one side, sometimes it'll be on both sides. But that little crack right there is really going to kill the value of your plane. But when you're selling one, that is what buyers are going to be looking for. They want a really, really solid shot of the tote. They want a solid shot of, or multiple shots of the iron, especially the back of the iron. And then they want a really good shot of the mouth so that they can see whether it's cracked. If you only show one side of the plane, one cheek, then a savvy buyer who's been burned a time or two buying planes online is going to assume the worst. They're going to assume that you're not showing something like that. And they may still buy it from you, but they're not going to fork over as much money as you might have otherwise gotten if you had removed all doubt and clarified that there were no cracks or breaks. And the main takeaway there is anything that you know is wrong with the plane, make sure that you highlight that, make sure that you show that. And as far as I'm concerned, it should be shown in one of the very first pictures, if not the first picture. So for example, this one right here, I didn't know that was cracked when I bought that. And as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I had to scrape the rust off of the sides of this. So I'll give the seller the benefit of the doubt that maybe they didn't know. And that's not a terribly common place for these to crack, but just to give you an example of one that I've personally been burned on. One of the questions that comes up quite often in the hand plane community, especially when it comes to buying and selling, specifically selling, is do I sell it as is, as I found it at the yard sale or at the flea market, or do I clean it up? And the general answer to that question is most buyers, if you want to appeal to the widest audience, it is leave it as is. Unless you are very, very experienced with restoring planes, your best bet is to just leave it as is, because people prefer to ruin them themselves. I mean, people prefer to restore the planes themselves. But that's not a hard and fast rule, because I use these as examples. This is one that I actually had a friend of mine clean up for me, and he's fairly experienced, did a good job. It's not overdone. He didn't use anything super abrasive, no chemicals. This is one that is as found, and this is a 4.5 that I will be cleaning up before I try to list it. So I'll put a new handle on there, and I'll get rid of all that dirt and grime and that surface rust. And part of my reason for that is I want to make sure that there's nothing hiding, such as a crack underneath some of that surface rust. I'll put a different knob on there. But it really comes back to the amount of experience you have with quote unquote restoring planes or cleaning them up. If you're going to do it, never do something to a plane that can't be undone. So me personally, I'm not a big fan of paint on planes. So for my own collection, I'm not going to buy one that somebody painted the bed in. It might look great, and it might look great for somebody else, but that's just not me. And I talked about it in my video on cleaning up hand planes. Evaporust, as a rule, is not that bad if you can avoid it. Don't use it if you can scrape it off with a razor, just like I talked about. But if the plane is so far gone, evaporust is not going to be the end of the world, and it also depends on how far you're planning on going with it. I'm not going to soak this 4.5 in evaporust. Like I said, I'll just scrape that. But if you remember nothing else, just don't use vinegar. When you're taking your pictures, make sure that you get all of the different angles of all the different sides of the sole. Preferably disassemble your plane completely, and I'll show a short snippet of that at the end of the video. But you want to disassemble it completely and show all the different angles, and really just give your buyer the best possible idea of the overall condition of the whole plane. But right now we're talking primarily about the body, aka the sole. In the secondary category, that's where I put the frog, and in this case, size matters. If it's a number 4 or a number 5, let's face it, that's the Chevy 350 of the hand plane world. You can find frogs for that size just about anywhere. Now, if you were looking at a number 2 or especially a number 8, oh my God, if you're looking at a type 5 through type 8, number 8, if it's got a busted frog, just walk away. I don't care if they're giving it away, just walk away, because you will never find a frog for that number 8. If you've been around long enough, you've seen enough hand planes, you know that it's pretty common for the top of the frog to be broken or just sheared off, lateral adjust, lever gone. And those are things that you want to look for. And as a seller, of course, like everything else, you want to make sure that you capture that. If it's cracked, or especially if it's broken, make sure you capture that in the pictures. Also in the secondary line, take a look at that knob. sellers, make sure you're taking good pictures of the knob, because it's pretty common for them to be cracked. Could have been repaired, especially at the base, because a lot of times they get over tightened and then they get busted. And if it is busted, how bad is it? Is it a crack like that, and a nice little divot taken out, and maybe that's been stabilized with some CA glue? Or is it something like that where it's sustained a life-threatening injury and it's really got it bad? Or maybe it's been repaired, like this bad mamma jamma right here. For the secondary stuff, last and certainly not least is going to be your lever cap. Of course, as the seller, you're going to want to capture that, especially that leading edge, just because when lever caps are jacked, that's typically where they get jacked at. And it's not uncommon to see them like this, and y'all know how this happens. That's somebody tightening or loosening a chip breaker screw using the lever cap. This right here maybe fell off the bench, I'm not sure, or maybe they were using the corner of it to do the chip breaker screw. This one right here, not quite as bad. It's just got the little tiny chip out of the corner. But as a seller, once again, you got to make sure that you highlight that so that the buyer knows exactly what they're buying or exactly what they're bidding on. Is it clean? Is it chipped there? And then another thing is the tension spring on the back of this. So if I'm selling a lever cap, especially on, say, through my Facebook group, I'm always going to try to send a video of the action on the tension spring there. And if you haven't seen one, I don't have one right here handy, but sometimes this will get floppy to where it'll flop. Now when it goes, when you go to install it, once it's got tension on the tension spring, when it's laying against the lever, or excuse me, the chip breaker, then chances are it's going to be fine. You can see where this one's kind of been bent over, probably to reintroduce that tension. But those are all things that you want to make sure that you're letting folks know, i.e., do you have a floppy lever? If the things we talked about so far are the primary and secondary things, then I'm going to call these the tertiary things. There's a certain demographic out there, there's a certain group of buyers that are going to buy planes because they have pretty parts. You know, pretty parts sell planes. This is in addition to the kitchens and bathrooms we talked about earlier. Remember, you want to appeal to as wide of an audience as possible, but if you happen to come across some rosewood like this that's got that nice sapwood that's, you know, dual colored, that's something that is going to stand out. It's going to make that hand plane stand out, and it's going to make it more appealing to that certain demographic of buyers, because people like pretty planes. They like pretty tools. What I'm trying to say is the overall aesthetic of the hand plane is going to help sell it. If I could just philosophize with y'all for a minute, let me just talk about, you know, 4s and 5s. Who buys 4s and 5s? In my experience, it's newbies, people that are brand new to woodworking, brand new to hand planes, just getting into hand tools, and then flippers. That's who buys them. Occasionally collectors, if they need a specific number 4, they're trying to complete, you know, 1 through 20, types 1 through 20 or something. But that's who buys them, and that is your target demographic when you are selling a number 4 or number 5. So just something to keep in mind. Having said that, you know, parts guys like me will buy just about anything if the price is right. If it's got some decent parts on it, I don't care if it is cracked or if it's jacked up. Sometimes that makes it more appealing, because then I know that I can take the good parts from it. The takeaways here, sellers, make sure you take really good pictures of your plane and all the different aspects. Make sure you highlight what's wrong with it. Buyers, of course, you know, reverse everything I'm talking about here, but also go and watch my video that I put up about what to look for when you're buying your first hand plane. Even guys that are not buying your first, if you're buying your 20th, you'll still get some valuable information from watching that video. Let me just add this, because I know somebody's going to call me out on it if I don't. There's a difference between buying planes online, you know, buying them on Marketplace or eBay or wherever, versus buying them in person. So if you were buying them in person, then I'm going to say that you can put more of an emphasis on how flat is the sole, which you can, you know, it doesn't hurt to have a straight edge of some kind with you. And then you just set it on the sole like so, and you hold it up to the light and you see where the light comes through. So it looks like that toe might be off just a little bit. So if flatness of the sole is something that's really important to you and you don't want to spend a bunch of time lapping the sole, then this is something that is important when you're buying in person. And you can ask somebody who's selling online, hey, can you check how flat the sole is? But it's a little bit harder to do. They don't know exactly what your standard is going to be. But here's an example of one that I bought online at an auction. Just some of those things that you just don't know. I knew a lot of things. I knew the tote was cracked. I knew the half the knob was gone. But for example, I didn't know that the Stanley number 4.5 had a Sargent lever cap on it. So until I pulled that off, there was no way that I could have known that. So that, you know, there's a gamble that's associated with buying planes online. But to me, that's half the fun. That might not be half the fun for you, especially, you know, if you're trying to save as much money as possible. But speaking of saving money, don't get into a bidding war with a collector when you're online. You know, you're on Can I Have It or eBay. If you're just a user and you're looking to fill out your user set, don't get in a bidding war with a collector, because you're going to lose. Now, you might help them pay more and help the seller out, which is good, but don't get in a bidding war with a collector. I promised y'all a sample layout of what a hand plane for sale might look like as you list it. And I mean, look, this isn't the military. This is just a sample layout. There's 100 different ways to do it, but the drill sergeant's not going to come in and, you know, flip your bed because you didn't lay it out exactly like this. But this will give the buyer an idea of exactly what it is that they're buying. And so you can take a shot like this and then turn everything upside down and take another shot. And that'll give everybody a really good idea. And if we want to get really far into the weeds, we can look at things like, you know, how worn is the brass here, because that is going to impact how much backlash you have. How worn is that part right there? If you leave things connected like this, you know, is the buyer going to think, oh, well, that's probably frozen because they didn't take that off. If they would have taken that off, or if it wasn't frozen, they would have taken it off. So just all things to consider when you want to remove all doubt from the buyer's mind that they are in fact getting a quality product, that if they're bidding on it. And the thing to remember is, you know, folks are going to be thinking, a savvy buyer is going to be thinking, okay, if I buy this hand plane for $50, am I going to have to spend another, you know, $20 or $30 buying parts for it? And that's a wrap. Hopefully that'll give you all some things to think about as a buyer in choosing how you want to display your planes and how you want to take pictures of them when you're going to sell. And for the buyers out there, it'll give you an idea of maybe some things that you hadn't necessarily thought of, especially if you're relatively new to buying. And now I want to hear from you. What did I miss? What's been your experience as a buyer? What are the kind of things that you look for that maybe I didn't mention? You know, so whether you come see me on Facebook at Just Plain Fun, the Parts Division, or drop a comment here on YouTube. But most of all, just, you know, thanks for watching. I appreciate y'all tuning in, and I look forward to seeing y'all out there.